Good morning, everyone. My name is Dr. Tanya Radford, and I teach at Dominican College in Orangeburg, New York. And I am the moderator this morning. I'm very glad to say and excited to say that I am the moderator for this roundtable panel of young scholars. This roundtable presentation is called The Psychological and Educational Impacts of Quarantine. And we have three presenters, which I'll introduce last. But first, I wanted to run through a couple of details. So first, the format, we have three presentations and four presenters, and each of them will have around 20 minutes to both do make their presentation and also to engage with the audience. The difference between a roundtable format and a presentation format is that roundtables are designed to encourage audience engagement. So these presenters are ready for and eager for your participation after their relatively brief presentations. They're going to want both your questions and your own comments about your experience. So we encourage that. And there are two modes in which you can engage. The first is if you want to speak your comment, and I encourage that because it kind of creates a more vigorous sense of dialogue, then use the raise your hand feature, which is inside the reactions, which you guys are all, I'm sure, very Zoom savvy, but that's in the bar along the bottom of the screen. You can also post questions, and you should feel free to do this while the presenters are actually talking. You can post questions as they occur to you in the chat panel. Now, presenters may or may not see those. They're probably going to want to be focusing on their notes and other things, but then they'll be there, and I will keep track of questions posted into the chat. And if the presenter doesn't see them at the end, I'll encourage them to engage with that question. Okay, so two different modes for you guys to engage, and absolutely fine to post questions while the presentation is going on. But presenters, you don't need to feel like you need to stop to engage those questions unless you want to. Okie doke. All right, before we get started, are there any questions from any of the audience or any questions at all? Okay, then let me introduce our presenters this morning. I'm going to introduce them in the order in which they will present, and then I will just let them get started. Our first presenter today in Psychological and Educational Impacts of Quarantine is Shannon DiCristina from Farley Dickinson University, whose presentation is titled "The Effects of Social Media Use During a Pandemic." The second presentation will be given by a pair of presenters, Allison Hritz and Madisyn Hale from Point Park University. Their presentation is entitled "The Academic and Cognitive Effects of Virtual Learning and Future Recommendations." And third, Jenna Abeyta from Post University will be giving a presentation entitled "Quo Vadis? The Student-Athlete's Dilemma During COVID-19." So with no further ado, I turn it over to Ms. DiCristina. Shannon, one thing, audience, please make sure that you're muted so that no background noise interrupts.
Hi, can you all see the PowerPoint?
Yes.
So good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here. So today I would like to have a discussion about the effects of social media with respect to the recent coronavirus pandemic. But before we begin, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Shannon DiCristina, and I'm an honors student at Farley Dickinson University. So during this presentation, I would like to share some relevant aspects to consider in a short PowerPoint so we can all have the same basic background information before we begin an open discussion. And as the moderator said, feel free to write in the chat if you have any questions or ideas throughout the presentation. So now, Who here uses social media? I would venture to say that at least 90% of us engage with at least one form of social media. And that's why the effects are so important to consider, because it influences all of us in our daily lives and routine. It has become such a relevant and large part of our culture. And in fact, according to a Pew Research survey, millions upon millions of adults in the US alone will interact with social media daily, if not multiple times a day. And CNN also reports that teens will spend an alarming average of 7 hours a day just on social media entertainment apps. So it's safe to say that social media is an undeniable aspect for our lives. So now my major question is, how is this affecting us? So obviously the coronavirus has shut down many places of interactions. Teens and young adults were restricted from in-person classes, school events, athletic events. You can't go to restaurants, you can't really see people, or sometimes people's work got closed down. So it's safe to say that we saw and interacted with less people because we were forced to stay inside and isolate. So this led to many people turning to social media at unprecedented rates for entertainment and interaction. Because as humans, we do crave interaction. We are social beings. And it is proven by science that loneliness can have really harmful negative effects on the human psyche and body. And we've kind of seen this throughout quarantine. So the Harvard Medical School cites that loneliness can manifest itself in physical ailments, such as depression, chronic illnesses, such as high blood pressure, heart disease, diabetes. We see it in cognitive decline, impaired immunity, and even premature death. And the CDC also reports that mental health concerns and diagnosis have been on the rise since the outbreak, and the cases have increased significantly, especially with anxiety and depression. So to deal with this lack of interaction and its ill effects, many people in schools have been adapting to the shutdowns by using social media to facilitate connections. So many colleges, including Fairleigh Dickinson, as you see in the image here, tried to create some virtual events via social media to help students interact with one another. And these include like Instagram bingos, this virtual murder mystery party, story challenges. So far, social media has been a helpful way for users to get some form of interaction in a safe and socially distant manner. And social media is very good for maintaining old connections as well as building new ones. So for instance, as college students, we can still keep in touch with our old friends who maybe moved away to different schools. And another great example of maintaining interactions is a feature called Facebook groups. And so I know at least my parents are in a Facebook group for the community, my neighborhood. And this way members can kind of keep in touch, even though sometimes it's hard, and keep one another updated about each other's lives. And it helps to maintain some of the relationships that could have faded away based off not seeing each other as often. And it also provided a way for my parents to meet other people in the community. And so many people take advantage of the idea that social media can facilitate building new relationships. Like I mentioned before, Facebook groups, you can join a group just based off like an interest, a hobby, or passion. So for example, people can join like a Harry Potter group to meet with other fans and interact with one another. And in these groups, there's major potential for very positive and helpful interactions, which can actually improve your mental and physical health. So studies actually show that when people interact more and have more relationships, their lives are improved. And again, the Harvard Medical School finds that people who have social support are happier, have fewer health problems, and they actually live longer. And conversely, as we mentioned before, a lack of social interaction is associated with depression, cognitive decline, and even mortality. So social media can be a very helpful way for others to make connections, especially within the recent coronavirus pandemic and restrictions. And in fact, joining groups on social media will help you to build a positive identity and support system. So Pew Research actually finds that a majority of teens who belong to online groups say that these communities play a role in making them feel more accepted and helping them get through tough times. So these are all very beneficial aspects of social media, especially in light of the pandemic. But however, social media is not always a safe platform. So the Journal of Interpersonal Violence notes how social media usage is linked with an increase of bullying and cyberbullying. And it also states that social media use is associated with increased psychological distress. And this is a major problem because Pew Research also indicates that 59% of United States teens have been bullied or harassed online. And 90% of teens believe that cyberbullying is a major problem for people their age. So cyberbullying is a very major threat that, for users of social media, as it creates adverse effects on the human mind and emotions, such as increased risk for depression, anxiety, externalized negative behaviors, and it has been noticed that have an increased risk for suicide, which has also been on the rise since the COVID outbreak. So another reason that social media could be an issue is because it tends to make users feel more insecure and upset with themselves. So how many of you guys have been in a good mood and then you went on social media and became upset by what you saw? Because if so, you're not alone, because many users know how nowadays self-image and self-esteem are closely tied to social media and comparing yourself to others online. And it's proven that we are comparing our normal lives to other people's best self and sometimes false portrayal, which studies show lead to lower self-esteem and life satisfaction among users. And to go along with self-esteem, studies by the Department of Psychology in York University confirmed that viewing social media posts can often result in a worsened self-image, especially in young adult females. So many times social media will make us feel worse. And a study that really stood out to me was conducted by some psychologists at the University of Michigan. And in this study, they texted 79 participants 5 times a day for 14 days. And they asked them how they felt and how much time they spent on Facebook. And they found that the more time people spent on Facebook, the worse they felt later on, and the more their life satisfaction declined over time. And this idea is also backed by further research, because researchers in Austria found that participants reported lower moods after using Facebook for 20 minutes compared to people who just browse the internet for 20 minutes. So very clearly, social media use can be tied to feeling worse about yourself and a decrease in mood. But social media can also be a problem because people can get addicted. And researchers have found that users can get a high from getting likes, as our brain will release dopamine when this occurs. And there's also been kind of talk about social media addiction because social media works just like gambling does on a variable reinforcement schedule. So this means that when a response or a reward pattern is unpredictable and random, we are intrigued by what we might find, if we're going to find it, what quality, what quantity, if there's going to be more. So this whole process just keeps enticing us to keep on scrolling to the next post, to keep clicking, to keep pressing enter again and again, because we don't know what we're going to find and we want to find it. And another cognitive issue related to social media is under the topic of arousal. So neurotherapists state how we are exhibiting higher states of arousal on social media. And with higher states of arousal comes reduced abilities to observe, to integrate information, and to be creative, and less of an ability to sustain focus. So on a very larger scale, this affects our brain states when we are learning, trying to use our memory or our creativity, which is a big issue for people who are still trying to get an education, of course. And studies accentuate this idea because so some studies report that non-academic internet use, including social media use among university students, was negatively associated with classroom performance and grades, and that was measured by tests and final examinations and grade point averages. So people who engaged with non-academic internet use more often were found to perform worse academically. And social media also affects sleeping patterns as the light emitted from screens disrupts our body's natural ability to produce the sleep hormone melatonin. And as we know, a lack of sleep also leads to a wide variety of health problems. So in short, social media use has been on the rise, especially since the pandemic, as it provides a way to interact with others with respect to social distancing measures and lockdowns. And social media does provide a safe and great way to connect with others and maintain relationships and build new relationships and form groups, which is very helpful for the human mind and psyche. But there are other consequences to consider. And that's why it is so important for us to reflect on our social media use to see how it affects us, especially since our increased reliance on this technology. So while there's no clear-cut solution to address the proper and ideal way to use social media, understanding social media's significance and impact is the first step to addressing the issue to find a meaningful solution. So now for our discussion, I encourage anyone to share their thoughts, opinions, reactions, anything at all about the presentation. And I also provided just a sample prompts to answer. So thank you.
I've definitely experienced the comparison, being on a team with all girls and coaching and all this. I see kids constantly on social media and constantly always wishing oh, I wish I had that, or I wish I looked like that, and so I've definitely seen that reaction as well.
Great job, Shannon. Definitely agree with what Jenna just said, right? We always fall into the comparison trap, but what a lot of people tend to forget is that people usually post on social media what they want others to see, right? So it could look like everything is, beautiful and fine and going well, but the person could really be struggling, right? So we're only seeing a snapshot. We're not seeing the whole entire story, what's happening.
Excellent point. Shannon, can you stop sharing your screen so that we can see more faces in case people are raising their hands? Fantastic.
I was going to say a concern of mine, because I saw you had that question written, is how is this going to change how we interact physically with people? The more that we use it, the more we're in isolation. How does that change how we view others physically and interpersonally,
I was wondering if there was a study you found that might have indicated a specific amount of time that being on social media did not impact them negatively. Like, is it only 10 minutes a day or something like that? That wouldn't cause those negative feelings to occur?
I mean, that's a very good question. I didn't come across any research about that, but I do know one of the studies said even just going on Facebook for 20 minutes will diminish your mood and you'll report lower satisfaction. But I know many people during the pandemic have been spending definitely much more than 20 minutes on social media, especially because that's also one of the main forms of how they're interacting with others. So I'm not sure about the complete time frame, but I know at least 20 minutes, you're going to report a lower mood.
Do they have any ideas about why that is? Why it seems to create a decrease in mood rankings?
For me personally, like the longer I stay on the phone, scrolling and scrolling and scrolling, and it could be 20 minutes, like she said, you kind of just start feeling after you're done like you wasted time and that you should have done something else. And then of course there is that comparison and all this stuff. So like that's probably why I would imagine that even in a short amount of time, like that's a reason why that people might start having a negative side effect of that.
Yeah, I thought that was a really great point, because I wish I could be on social media for 20 minutes, but I feel like as I start scrolling and then it's like 2 hours later, I'm like, where did time go? And I feel like after I'm done, I'm like, okay, like I wish I was more productive. Like I should have been doing my homework. I should have been doing something else to make me, like I should have been productive, and then I just wasted all that time. So like that makes me feel bad. And then like the amount of times I've deleted Instagram because I'm like, I've fallen into traps of like, oh, this beautiful person and this beautiful person, and then I'm like, oh. So like that comparison also makes me like that's like negative for me. But I feel like I've also had some like positive impacts on social media. I actually joined TikTok like after the pandemic started, so I was never on TikTok before. But like I've like learned a lot on TikTok about like in general, but also about myself. And so like I've also had some positive experiences. But generally I'm like, oh my goodness, I spent 2 hours. How did, because TikTok videos are like a minute long. How did I spend 2 hours on TikTok? So
Gabrielle, you had your hand raised before, yes.
Yeah, I think you made really great points just now. I agree with everything you said, and I was actually going to bring up like the type of social media that I use also affects my mood. So I noticed that like if I go on Facebook, suggested posts come up, and a lot of them are very negative. I'll get posts like a shooting that occurred or something, and that immediately brings down my mood. But when I go on TikTok, I also downloaded it after the pandemic started. I was like, what? Well, a lot of people are enjoying this. I want to see what it's about. And I actually really enjoy it. And the For You page that I have is very positive. I know it like kind of goes with how you interact with the app itself. So it brings more like positive things into my life than Facebook does. So I noticed that when I'm spending more time on Facebook scrolling, it lowers my mood pretty much right away versus scrolling on TikTok. And I know it's not like great to spend hours and hours on it, but in moderation, I do enjoy that app more. So that's what I wanted to add to it.
Kelsey and then Amani.
Hi. So I definitely agree with a lot of the things that have been said. I relate to the feeling of like of spending time on social media afterwards, feeling like, oh, I should have been more productive during that time. But I also do find that social media helps me to step outside of myself sometimes, because I just seeing updates on people's lives, like, oh, this person's having a baby, this person's getting married, this person's there's one girl who often posts updates on her journey with various surgeries. I think she has some sort of like one leg shorter than the other thing, and she's always posting really positive stuff about that. And for me, it's also a platform where I find out about various activism things that I'm involved with, which I think is really cool. But I also don't spend time on social media all the time because I don't really have time for that. I do spend a lot of time, I'm in a few different like basic messenger groups. I use that a lot more often. I think if I were to use Facebook every day, I would probably start to see some of the more negative effects. And for times I've gone on like really long, I do see that. But I also only have I technically have an Instagram, but I don't really use it. I pretty much only use Facebook because like if I were to try and keep up with like all the different social media accounts, I just like would not have time for that. Like I barely ever post anything on Facebook as it is, so I feel like it just makes sense for me to get like all of them. But I don't know.
Amani, I think, Brooke, I see that you have your hand raised too, but we're going to need to move to the next presentation. So Brooke, I'm going to ask you to write your question or comment down so we can come back to it at the end. And Amani, if you could make your comment or question.
Yes, thank you, Shannon. It was a great presentation. I definitely think the effects that social media has on you is dependent on the content of social media. And like many other people have said, I have experienced a lot of positive things from social media, especially because it provides that social interaction we've all been craving because of the pandemic. And a lot of what I've come across, at least, is very motivational. And on the topic of mental health, I've also come across a lot of therapists trying to give people in the general public tips on how to deal with the loneliness and the negative side effects of the pandemic. So I definitely feel like though there are adverse effects that cannot be ignored, there are also positive effects that should be acknowledged. And social media shouldn't really be written off as something bad, but something that can have the potential to really make a positive change in our lives.
Terrific comments and all around everyone. We're going to move to the second presentation now, and I'm sure there are still residual issues, but these issues are so closely tied to the other ones that we faced during the pandemic that if that is something you had in your mind, save it for the conversation at the end, please. Okay, our next presenters, go ahead.
I'll share my screen. Give me 1 second. There we go. All right. In presenter mode. Can everybody see our screen? Awesome. Forgive us if we present this like teachers. That's what Madisyn and I do. But welcome. This is our presentation on the academic and cognitive effects of virtual learning. So to do some introductions, my name is Allison Hritz. I'm a senior secondary social studies educator major at Point Park University. At the time of this when we were doing this research, I was actually facilitating a community hub for virtual learners, and I was working with a variety of different school districts, K through 7.
And my name is Madisyn Hale. I'm also a senior at Point Park. I am a middle level English education major and special education. And then when we did this survey, I was a learning pod tutor in the Pittsburgh area for 4 5th graders. So I was responsible for making sure they were on their meets when they had them and making sure they were doing their schoolwork when they didn't have them.
So to give kind of an agenda of what we're going to be talking about today, we're going to start with talking about the problem that led us to conduct a survey of teachers in Pennsylvania. We're going to do the introduction to the survey and some disclaimers about our survey, talking about our actual study, and then takeaways and conclusions as well as our discussion. Does anybody have any questions, comments, concerns before we move forward? All right.
So the problem, I think, as we are all well aware of, last March, COVID-19 became a very prevalent thing in our lives. So throughout the month of March, typically around the date, March 13th, many universities and public, private, charter schools all kind of got this weird time off, and they're like, okay, just have fun for a week, don't get sick, you'll be back. But then as things progressed, we were not back. They had to switch everything suddenly to virtual, and we, most of us at least, had probably done some online classes before, but we had never had a strictly virtual schedule, and they were tossing around the words asynchronous, synchronous, remote, virtual. No one really sure what those actually meant. So synchronous versus asynchronous learning. Asynchronous is whenever you have the work, the teacher posts it, you are responsible for turning that in by the deadline. Maybe there's some office hours, maybe there's some tutoring, but you are responsible for doing that on your own. Synchronous learning is whenever you attend a Zoom, a Google Meet, something like this, where the teacher is presenting the information to you directly and live. So that presents some problems, some inequities for quite a few students, districts, universities, schools, as everyone has different things going on in their lives. So something as education majors that we learned about a lot was Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is the basic idea of if our physical and emotional needs aren't met,
we cannot effectively learn. So if students don't have food, water, heat in their house, if maybe someone in their family is sick, if there could be abuse going on at home, we don't know, and there's sometimes no way to find out, we can't expect them all to learn at this rigorous pace that we expect them to learn at. So we had to make sure that not only are these needs met, but simple things like technology and Wi-Fi that we're expecting students to have to be able to turn in all of these assignments. And another problem we saw was students with specific needs. So students with individualized education plans, so students with disabilities who need these specific goals and accommodations and adaptations to receive their free and appropriate public education. And then along with students who are gifted or advanced who need extra learning and extra supports as well.
So what we were picking up on is that there's going to naturally be inequity in education, as there already is. And especially when we did our literature review for this, we found that a lot of schools, even in Pennsylvania alone, do not have access to technology, and we're not on this 5-year plan to gain technology access in their schools. So this already created a problem because some students were receiving basic packets while the district over had Chromebooks already in place for students. Students and faculty of schools were not receiving proper trainings. They just kind of had technology thrown at them. And again, students were not having proper access to supports if they needed it, even if they had an IEP plan. And if you're not familiar with IEP plans, it is federally mandated that these students have supports, but this created a lot of problems during the pandemic because you could not have a person physically with your students at these times. So we decided to conduct a survey of K through 12 teachers displaced to an online method of instruction. These could not be teachers who already were virtual educators in a cyber school or anything. They had to be displaced onto some form of online instruction. We recruited teachers via social media and email. So we wrote up a disclaimer, had them sign permission to participate in our survey. In response, we had 35 return surveys from a variety of different school districts, from all different geographic backgrounds, socioeconomic backgrounds, from across the state of Pennsylvania. We eliminated one survey response because they did not meet the requirements of our survey. And we had it open from November 18th to December 4th. Before we get into kind of the results of our study, and the different responses that we got in more specific detail, these are some disclaimers that we found need more research in the future. So again, we just need more research about the topic. This goes into assessment, which I'll talk about in a little bit, but this needs to be assessed throughout time, even as students enter into the building. So the period of research needs to be broader if it's continued in the future. Again, this was done in a specific amount of time. It needs to be broadened. We only had this opened in the fall, but it would be interesting to know how this is affecting students as they're going back in the spring. More in-depth research about grade levels and subjects. This survey was only conducted in Pennsylvania, so it would be interesting to do this on a federal level. Also comparing virtual versus in-person learning. So comparing how students are doing online versus if they're going back in the classroom. And more research about the social effects, specifically peer motivation, things like that in the classroom. And again, just further assessment all around.
Okay, so our study, as Allison said, we had a total of 35 participants in our survey. And whenever we were analyzing this data, we broke it into two primary items: geographic location and poverty levels. So as you can see, we had about an equal number of urban and suburban participants that were the majority. And then if you look at the bottom, most of our schools were identified as high levels of poverty. So the way that this is determined is based on the percentage of students eligible in the school district for free and reduced lunch prices. So over half of the schools that we talked to were in the high level. And then we broke our analysis and our questions on our survey into 6 primary categories. So our first one was the learning gap. I'm not sure if you guys have heard about the COVID slide. That was in a lot of articles that we read about for our literature review. And this is just the idea that as school, like curriculum, we have been moving at this rigorous pace. And now with a pause of almost a year in some people's education, where are they at and how much have they not progressed and possibly even slid back even more to a previous level? So the problem with this also is, as Allison was saying, we're not sure how to assess students in virtual learning. Are they just clicking through it? Are they not doing it at all? Is a parent or a peer or a sibling helping them with this? So even if we get that data, we are not sure how good it is. Our second one is student access to supports. So as both Allison and I said, we were working with students in the community to help them with their learning, to tutor them, to make sure they are doing it, to make sure they understand things. And not all students had this privilege. And even for students who were at community centers or learning pods, this may have been even more of a distraction for some of them, because then they have peers that may or may not be focused and may not have enough adults in the building to do this. Our third category focused on parental engagement. So anyone that is home with them, anyone at the community center, are they engaged with their students' learning? Can they help them? Are they communicating with the teacher to see if there's more work they could do or if they have done any of the work that is available for them? Our fourth section was focusing on students with IEPs, students with GIPs, and gifted students. So students, as we stated before, with individualized plans to help them meet these specific goals. And were they given the necessary supports to reach these goals? Were we able to see if they reached these goals? Our fifth section was focusing specifically on cognitive and social learning. As we previously stated, we focused on academic and cognitive effects, as opening social and emotional would have made our survey way too long for people to want to fill out. So this is just focusing on collaboration between students. Were they able to work with their peers in breakout rooms or in a community center to promote motivation, team building skills as much as possible? And our last section focused on technology. So did students have access to computers or Wi-Fi? Did students know how to use these weird forms of technology that they've never been taught about before? And did teachers know how to use them? Did they receive the necessary training? So then we have two charts on here for you guys. The one is on the school geography, the other is on the poverty levels. I think this presentation is going to be available to you guys after if you want to look more closely. As well, Allison and I have our contact information at the end if you would like the entire resource to look at.
Here were our basic takeaways and also touched on the recommendations we have moving forward for schools with virtual learning. Number one, there is a lack of progress assessment. This and also the second thing we're going to talk about go into a lot of equity issues with school districts, but we need to find better ways to assess student learning at home. There are schools that do, if you live in a smaller community, teachers will go and check in on their students or call home, but even that is unreliable because parents sometimes are not home to pick up the phone or to engage with their students. So finding better ways to assess student learning at home. There are a bunch of online resources for formative assessment. This is assessing students as they're learning. There are resources such as Pear Deck, which helps students participate anonymously in synchronous learning. Or there's resources like Kahoot, quizzes, that you can assess student learning, but even that is unreliable because they can Google the answers. So finding better ways to assess their progress in learning. Need for community supports. There was an article we did in our literature review that talked about moving forward, this school needs to be a community hub in different communities where resources such as the community food warehouse comes, any technology supports in the community, parent engagement, different social programs within the community focus on the school. And the school is not the ones that send students to find them on their own. We need to, in schools, partner with community supports for students to learn effectively. Parental presence and engagement. We need to be more mindful if a student does not have a parent at home, because what we found in our results is that this drastically affects how students perform in the classroom. There's previous studies about that even outside of the context of COVID and virtual learning, but parental presence and engagement is really important for our learners. And there's a lack of support and progress for students with IEPs, GIEPs, and advanced students. One that we didn't include at the time with this survey is also English language learner students. I have one in my classroom right now who has suffered drastically and has fell behind a year because she can't have access to supports. So making sure that even in the context of online, we are still getting these supports for students so that they're meeting their individualized goals. And peer support and motivation. If teachers can, breakout rooms are great. Having students work in pod systems like Madisyn did, where community members get together in their neighborhoods and do pod systems like that, because peer support and motivation are crucial for students to learn effectively. They're not as motivated at home without this peer support. And there was a lack of training for teachers and students. So moving forward, schools, faculties, administrations need to make this a priority in education, that technology and innovation is included, and that in PDE training like we have in Pennsylvania, keeping up with those hours for certification, that teachers are being actively trained in new resources so that in the case that something like a pandemic happens again, we are prepared for anything and we are not letting students fall behind for whatever external reason. So in conclusion, that is our study. If you would like a copy of the full resource, we send this out to the public schools that, or all the schools that participated in our survey. You can reach us at our emails. I can also put that in the chat, but we're really proud of this resource. We think that it can serve in a way that's beneficial to the community. All right, so I'm gonna close out my screen and put our emails in the chat. But I'm curious, how are you guys affected by this virtual learning? What's your experiences maybe with your siblings, your cousins, those kind of things?
Great presentation, guys. My mom is actually a second and third grade ESL bilingual teacher. So I've seen in Paterson, New Jersey, so a relatively urban school district. And I've seen firsthand, she's been teaching from home, they haven't returned to school. And I've seen firsthand how being virtual and learning from home can impact these ESL students more so than regular students or general ed students. And I know you guys didn't focus on that aspect, but Madisyn mentioned she was going into special education. And I was just wondering, do you feel that these students, after we return to school, would they be able to return to their levels with proper intervention, or they would have to go kind of down a level to make up for what they lost during virtual learning?
Yeah, I mean, of course, it depends on each student individually. Right now, I'm student teaching at a district where they can choose to either be in person or virtual every single day. So not only do we not have the proper data, but students don't feel any motivation because their peers that are still virtual aren't turning in work. So they're like, well, we're in school. Why should we have to turn in work? So unfortunately, at least from my point of view right now, we still don't have the data to even properly see where these students are at. I would imagine that some of them are going back to previous levels, while some of them have maintained and some of them may have even grew. Great question. Thank you.
Brooke and then Jenna.
Hi, good morning. Good presentation. Quick thought process here. So I know when we're talking K through 12, depending on where you are, some students have returned to in-person, some are hybrid, and some are still solely virtual. I have a younger brother, he's in elementary school. Now it's no question that high school students, upper middle school students, they're excited to return to school, see their peers, do the sports. But I found something interesting. I'm not sure if you've seen it with any of your students or siblings. My brother was online for a year and he did not want to go back. He wanted to remain in an online format. And I was wondering if anyone had similar experiences with younger children, or are we kind of out here by ourselves?
I definitely don't think you're alone. I saw Shannon had her hand raised. I don't know if she was just agreeing, but when I was working at the community hub that I was at, I had a kindergartner who had never even experienced the in-person schooling system. And I don't know if he can ever go. I mean, I think with time and some support, he could probably go back to an in-person structure. But it was really just interesting to see how socially he was falling behind and how he was developing behavioral problems and anxiety and things like that. And he's 5, you know? So I think that that is an individualized student thing, but that's not uncommon. And especially as students, especially at a younger age, are not used to the structure and normal structure of school systems. And their cognitive growth is kind of all over the place when they're younger. So you're not alone in that.
I actually have a neighbor who is 14 and who has loved the online format. Right. So it will be very interesting. Here's another area for research. There are some, not even just beginning students who have never experienced school, but some who have experienced school who actually have found working independently and zooming into classes to be more comfortable. So that's a very interesting thing too. Jenna, you're next.
Okay. I've actually kind of experienced the online before the pandemic. I ended up attending 5 different high schools because I moved from Colorado to Boston to play hockey and all that. For me, that switch to online at that time was rather challenging because I'm very hands-on. I like having the interactions with my teachers and all of that. And I found that I almost got lazy, and by the time I went back to like a in-person school, it was like a shock, you know. And like I said before, I coach these athletes that are in high school and grade school, and they go to school for a week and then they get quarantined because someone in the class got it, and it really, I can just see how it affects them, because it's like you're so excited to go back and then now you have to stay home, and like, yeah, so I can, like you guys said. And then my last point is that like obviously, like it has to be hard to survey people and get like the exact answers, because it really depends on the student themselves. Like, are they driven? Are they more prone to, like, you know, falling asleep in class or whatever it is? So like there's many factors that is really hard to gauge.
Go ahead, Kelsey. You'll be our last.
All right. So going off of the students preferring virtual learning, I have a cousin who's, I believe, about 13, and prior to COVID, he had some like social anxiety associated with being at school. And so I'm not really sure how exactly he's doing with virtual learning, but I get the impression that that's a more comfortable thing for him. But then on the other hand, over the summer, I volunteered with a summer camp thing that was kind of based in like my hometown elementary schools. And they had virtual for 4 days and then in person for 1 day. I was just there for the in-person days. And a lot of the kids were really happy to just see each other. Like it wasn't necessarily even just the being in the classroom, but just like being able to see their peers. But
Thank you, everyone, for your questions and comments. Let's move now to our third presentation. Jenna.
Okay, so feel free to ask questions. We can stop during the presentation. So I'm Jenna Abeyta from Post University. I'm currently a sophomore pursuing a double major in sports management and accounting, along with playing NCAA Division I women's ice hockey. I'm very passionate about my sport and my education, and I am grateful for my opportunity to be here with you all and present today. The topic I will be questioning is Quo Vadis, the student athlete's dilemma during COVID-19. Now, before we get started, I'd like all of you to put in the chat something that you're most passionate about. This can be sports, music, art, the honors program, anything of that nature, just something that you have a passion for. Riding horses, music, and the arts. Awesome. So it looks like from what everyone has been putting in that COVID-19 has had an effect on your availability to do those things that you're passionate for, right? Maybe not for the reading and learning, because like you can do that at home, but I want you to think about, like, how did that affect you? And most importantly, did it affect your identity? Okay, so nearly 500,000 college students participate in NCAA sports, and thousands more participate in other collegiate athletic associations. Many of these students have played their sport from a young age, putting in a tremendous amount of time and effort into getting to the collegiate level. They have been on strict routines and kept to high standards, and have sacrificed many things to be able to compete at such a high level. When choosing a college to attend, these student athletes not only look for a school that can help them earn a degree, but they also look for a school that will fit their needs as an athlete. Once they're accepted to the school, now they have to design their schedule around their sport. This includes choosing classes, meal times, study time, sleep, social life, all around, the practices, the games, the workouts, the video sessions, and there's many other team events that are mandatory to be at. So basically, when you play an NCAA sport, it becomes your job. Through the years of passion, hard work, dedication, and many life lessons learned, their sport basically becomes their identity. For me, I know personally, I identify myself as yeah, I go to college, but I'm an athlete. I play hockey. I'm a hockey player, So, anyways, the COVID pandemic took everyone by surprise. There's no question about that. It uprooted many people's lives, and it left many people mentally and physically at a loss. For college athletes specifically, it interrupted their sport, their life, their routine, and it ultimately affected their identity. In the spring of 2020, the NCAA suspended all of the in-progress sports, and unfortunately for many of the seniors, their athletic careers came to an end without warning. Unless they were planning on playing professionally, their competitive days were over. Now, without a doubt, this led to shock, sadness, depression, anxiety, all sorts of emotions that piled on top of the initial COVID-19 feelings. Now, in addition to the sports being canceled, students were sent home to learn virtually for the remainder of the spring semester. Because of these events, the NCAA sent out a survey to the student athletes to determine some of the effects it had on them. The data showed that over 1/3 of the students surveyed experienced sleep difficulties. More than a fourth felt a sense of loss, and 1 in 12 were so depressed that it was difficult to function. Now, for the student athletes, training is a huge component of their routine. As I'm sure for riding horses, you have to practice it. You're not just good at it at the first time, right? So another survey showed that due to the COVID-19 pandemic, there were many obstacles preventing the students from getting their proper training routines done. These obstacles include, but are not limited to, local regulations on travel, gatherings, enclosures, lack of appropriate facilities and equipment, lack of training partners, coaches, and even just motivation to get off the couch, and fear of exposure to the virus. Now, as I stated before, I played Division I NCAA women's ice hockey. I played this sport for 18 years. I started at the age of 3, if you can believe that. So never in my life had I had to take more than a couple months away from competition until COVID hit the US. And as of April 2021, it's been over a year since I've participated in a competitive game. Now, this was a huge blow to my lifestyle. I've thrived from competition my whole life. I've learned what it truly means to work hard because of my drive to succeed not only in sports, but in the classroom as well. I've learned what it means to not only be a member of a team, but how to be an effective leader as well. My closest friends have come from playing hockey, and my only jobs have included working at a rink or coaching the game that I love. For me, hockey literally runs through my veins. It is my life, and it truly is my identity. Unfortunately for my team at Post, the 2020-2021 season was canceled, and now I have to wait until August of this year to be able to regain that part of my life back. But for some lucky college athletes, their schools and leagues allowed competition to resume at the end of the fall of 2020 and early spring of 2021 season, under restrictions given to them by their institutions, states, the CDC, and the World Health Organization. But their seasons were unlike any other, to say the least. So restrictions were put in place to obviously mitigate the spread of the virus, and some of these recommendations to do so included daily self-health checks, universal mask wearing, and weekly or multiple days of the week COVID testing. These sports were labeled as low, medium, and high contact risk, and depending on their rank, the NCAA also gave recommendations on COVID testing strategies for each category. Now, hockey is a high contact risk sport, and so they had more recommendations for testing strategies than probably a lower ranked sport. But at the end of the day, it was each school's responsibility to design their own return to play rules based off of all the recommendations they've received from their state, the CDC, the World Health Organization, and the NCAA itself. Some schools remain virtual, others allowed in-person learning completely, and others only allowed their athletes to return back to campus for their playing seasons. The important factor to consider is that for the schools that allowed any student back on campus, the student was given the ability to choose whether they wanted to return or whether they were more comfortable staying home and learning virtually. In the end, each student returning or graduating had to answer the question, quo vadis, which means, which way am I going? And that is the end of my speech. So if you all have any questions or anything, feel free to either put it in the chat or say it. It looks like Anna Maria, you had your hand up.
Oh, I was clapping, but I actually do have a question.
Yeah.
So I'm a student athlete myself, and I know how difficult it's been to lose the competition season. I'm actually a senior, so I was just recently told by a coach that I can't participate next year, despite the extra year being given. And so I was wondering what you use to fill the extra time, because I know this has been a conversation that my friends and I have had, and I've even seen like athletes are a social group of people in a sense, because we're always, even if we're introverts, we kind of all hang out with each other. We have like a second family. So I was wondering, like, have you seen like an increase in mental health issues amongst your team? Like, I know I've had teammates who they were so accustomed to being surrounded by everyone, and now all of a sudden they were by themselves, trapped in like a room. And what else have you done to like fill the time and keep yourself occupied while not being at practice almost all day?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's been a tough ride, to say the least. I didn't do a very good job in the whole first year after we got shut down and sent home. I laid on the couch. I scrolled on social media. I didn't really work out. I couldn't go to the rink, and it was really a hard time for me, right? It was about December that I finally realized, okay, like I can't be feeling sorry for myself at this point. Everyone's gone through it, like I'm not alone. And so just recently I've actually started getting back into the gym, started getting back on the ice, started coaching again. But yeah, it's been really tough, and I think it depends on each person, but just having, like you said, the second family, like staying on social media, text messaging, trying to keep those relationships, even if it's just for 5 minutes a day talking to one of your teammates. Yeah, and so I think that was a great question. Like, what did you do?
I was the same way as you. I lost motivation. I'm a swimmer and a thrower on a track team. So like you need space to go and throw, and
Right.
we're in the park. So there's no way to throw if like I can't hurt someone. I really don't want to hurt someone.
Right.
And pools were closed. Like I'm from New York, so pools were closed, things were closed, gyms were closed for a very long time, and I have high risk family members. So even going for a walk or a run was kind of like a dangerous situation, because there was always tons of people on the running trails or on the area. So you didn't know who was being safe, who's come in contact to who. Like, so I understand what you mean, where you said like you're on the couch for a couple of months, but I kind of filled it with just trying to help my teammates and
Right.
being active at my school in other ways.
Right. And I mean, even when you're home, like it was hard for me to figure this part out, but even just doing like 10 push-ups or 10 sit-ups or jumping jacks or burpees, or like even just doing 10 of them a day, like 10 of them a day for 365 days of the year, like that's quite a bit if you add it up, right? So I mean, even just getting off the couch and doing just something is definitely better than, just feeling sorry. Okay, Brooke.
Just to add to the conversation, I don't really consider myself a student athlete. I did do 2 seasons of IDA, but it was a club sport. And for those who don't know what IDA is, it's basically horseback riding for the school. I did dressage, but with horses, there is a lot of competition outside of the school. It's unlike other sports like track or hockey, because people will continue to do this into their 70s or 80s, and they continue to ride and compete. What I found was really interesting in my community, at least with riding, is while we couldn't compete at the beginning of the pandemic, I found a lot of us, we've done other things with our horses. We've worked more at home, worked on our own things, went trail riding. A lot of people don't go and enjoy nature. They just stick in the arena and they work on their tests, they work on their jumps, and they don't enjoy their horses. So I think this pandemic has been a little bit of a blessing in that sense, at least for the equine community. It's really reconnected us with our partners, remember why we've come into the sport and why we like to do it. So there was definitely draws to the pandemic, obviously, but I like looking at some of the positive sides.
Yeah, that's a very good point. We always gotta stay positive. I see a question. Did anyone have virtual workouts with your team? For my hockey team, we didn't necessarily, just because everyone's schedule was all over the place. But my school did finally end up sending out workout packet. And if you didn't have access to the gym, there was a separate one just to give you body weight exercises. For soccer at our school, I know they did team workouts on Zoom for the first part of for last semester. So that's a really good question, and I think it depends on the coach and the school and the sport. I do have a question for everyone. Um, what did your school do for the wellness of your students? I know for post we had an athletic counselor that would sometimes get on Zoom with our team and just like kind of talk out like how you're doing, maybe like ways to work through that. But did any of your schools like do anything for the wellness of the students?
Fairleigh Dickinson, I think, is in Teaneck, New Jersey, has been wonderful with all of the virtual programs that they offer and the support that they provide for their students. They have like Zoom, they've never stopped sending out like a weekly schedule of all the different activities they offer. They do, just to mention a few things, they do like virtual dance parties or movie nights. They also offer meditation, like a Zoom meditation group that I actually used to attend in person, but I haven't attended on Zoom. We have a student psychological services center. And while towards the beginning of the pandemic, they weren't offering services, they did offer like if you needed anyone to talk to, or they can refer you to psychological services in your area. So they're very supportive of their students, always advocating for their success, both personal and academic and professional. So I definitely feel like when you have that support system from your professors, from your general university, it definitely makes a positive difference and makes everything kind of a little easier to deal with.
Yeah, I want to jump in really quickly and say I go to Westfield State University in Massachusetts, and our campus community is very similar with having access to virtual meditation sessions and stuff like that. And we have a campus activities board that also promotes these virtual events going on our campus. And the the counseling services are always available virtually, which is really nice to have. And it was very similar how at the beginning of the pandemic, there wasn't like no one knew what was going on. So it was kind of hard to like get into that groove. But a year later, they have all of these resources, which is really awesome. I also wanted to just say that you brought up really great points about like loss of identity, because I grew up as a dancer and performing on stage, and I haven't performed in over a year now. And I am a senior, so I don't get that experience of performing with the dance company that I'm a part of, and it's been really hard. but you made a great point about identity and like, how do you fill that time up when you're home all the time? And I watched my neighbor build an ice rink for his son to do hockey outside during the winter. And it was just really heartwarming to see, because his father was really trying hard to facilitate that at home for him. So that was just like something positive that I saw this past winter that I wanted to share. But yeah.
Kelsey?
Thanks everybody for everything you shared today. It's really been cool to hear more. Hang on, I forget what I was gonna say now. Hang on, maybe let somebody else come back to me.
For sure.
It occurs to me that, we're all very eager to be done with this. But at the same time, you have all learned a lot during this last year. So my question that would maybe bring all three presentations together and also the audience, how can we do this better? Because I don't think this is our last time with this, right? Like, not that we want this to be the new normal, but what are the positive things that we can take away to make this better the next time? Thoughts?
I think like learning that you're not in this alone, right? Like and even just like putting your hand on your heart and just reminding yourself, like, I'm right here, I'm in the moment, like I love myself, right? And I think that's something that would help a lot with stress, with depression, and just knowing that you're not alone. You have people who are in the same situation as you, and just knowing that you guys have something to share,
I was going to say that it taught me a lot that, like, even if you're displaced, you can still make a social impact. I spent a lot of this summer doing research on different social causes, and as we all know, I mean, it was such a tumultuous year politically and socially. But there are ways that you can canvas and be active in the community and do things for others. Like, I did a letter campaign for people who really need letters, or I volunteered with Next Gen PA, which does political advocacy work, and just did online phone banking. You can still do things just differently. There's not always going to be the sense of normalcy, but you can still do the things that bring you joy.
Sabrina? Sabrina, you might be muted.
Oh.
There you go.
Oh,
go ahead,
you can hear
Sabrina.
me?
Yep, now we can.
Okay, I was going to say that I firmly believe that everything happens for a reason, and like this pandemic brought out a lot of stuff, especially for me. Even though I wasn't able to play my last season of tennis, I feel like each and every one of us and myself has become super resilient, and we were able to combat these adversities that we all collectively experienced, and even brought out really great things. Like, I was able to run my own business during the whole pandemic because I really needed to put myself into something that showed my true creativity and passion. So without the pandemic, I really wouldn't be able to start my own business at all. So I feel like maybe in little ways, each and every one of us found something that made it worthwhile for this whole pandemic. Like, we found little things in ourselves that we can, appreciate and thank the pandemic for in some way, because it definitely brought out some, good things, and also like took away some things. But I feel like everything happens for a reason, and that we should be grateful that this happened, because it made us super resilient and super, ready for anything else that comes our way.
Brooke?
Just out of curiosity, I was wondering if anyone else here was like a first time. Is this your first conference, or have people been here to multiple conferences? I was just curious where we're at with that.
This is my third conference.
This is also my third conference.
This is my first.
Wow. Okay, no, I was just curious. I love this online format, but I also really miss being there, and I miss seeing everyone. I miss the big conference hall. But I am kind of grateful it was online this year. I won't go into the details, but I did have my own personal emergency yesterday. And if I was in Albany, things could have gone totally south. So I guess just like Sabrina said, things happen for a reason. And I'm glad I was here. But I do miss you guys. And I really miss being at the conference. But this experience has been great.
And this panel has just been so wonderful. Thank you to all of our presenters for really fantastic presentations. I wish we had even more time to chat because then thank you to the audience. Your questions and your comments were just so fabulous, like a great morning all around. So let's give a round of applause to our presenters. And it's 10:15, so that's all the time that we have today. Thank you all.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you guys.
Thank you, guys.
See you at another panel. There's lots more terrific ones. Jenna, terrific job. It was really nice to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you as well. And I can't remember your name. I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. And it doesn't pop up because I'm on the channel. That's not me. Dr. Tanya Radford.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you and spend time with you this morning, Jenna.
See
you around.
All right.
You too.
Bye, Linda.
Bye-bye, Jenna. Good job.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, she did great. All of them.